evening, everybody. Today is January 17th, 2019. It is now 4:40 p.m. and welcome to you diehard Gladiator Rochester City School District fans. We are here once again working diligently and I think effectively on responding to the Distinguished Educators Report. Now, why do I say that? Rather than say that over and over again, that I think we're working effectively, I want to instead say thank you to a number of people, and if I forget particular people, charge it not to my heart, to my head. I'm not remembering things the way I used to. I want to say thank you to Barbara Dean Williams, Beth Massetti Miller, Cecilia Golden, who is coming in, Ray G. Martino, of course, Carl, Ruth Turner, Linda Simmons. Ruth is raising her hand, just in case you didn't know who Ruth was. Linda Simmons, Dan Loengard, Carmen, I have a tough time with your last name. Peluso. Okay, I'll get it. Toya Wilson. Let's see, who else? Toya's raising her hand. I said Beth. Who did I miss? And I apologize if I did. Did I miss anybody, Barbara? Who was at that meeting? Oh, and of course, last but certainly not least, he's not here, that's why I didn't remember off the top of my head, Dr. Kino. The reason why I went through the trouble of saying that is we all met in the second floor conference room, determined to see if we could figure out a format and content that would make some sense, that would provide staff who's charged with the responsibility of working on the balance of the report. Oh, Amy was there as well. In any event, a number of us were in the second floor conference room and we busted it out. It reminded me of my old days in law school, where you knew you had a deadline, you knew you had a charge, and it required everybody to sit down and make sure that we were going to get it right. And again, not one person in that room could have done this. Now, I know some folks have looked at it and some folks have said, hey, wait a second, I still got problems with it, it's not satisfactory. That does not take away from the fact that people work diligently and deliberatively and methodically on trying to address some of the concerns that were put before the board on the previous day. So the goal for today is to go through the accountability section so that it can serve, if you will, as a model for the balance of the reports. I want to tell folks, in case there's any doubt that the entire district is working diligently on this, this is probably the third, how many revisions have we had on this? This is certainly the third revisions, but you don't get it right. Oh, and Everton was there as well. I'm just saying thanks, Everton. And this may not be the last version, but I believe in my heart, because I witnessed what it took. People talk about distributive leadership, right? In conceptual form, I saw it the other day in the second floor conference room. Again, it may not be perfect. I can tell you this, it's 110 times better than the Hempstead report, which the Board of Education in Hempstead submitted to the commissioner, and she approved that. I think it's much more substantive, more meatier, there's more meat on the bones, but it may not be right just yet. And so that's the purpose of today's meeting. My goal is to get it as right as possible and then use that as a tool to give the administration some direction on completing the balance of the report. Now, I want to remind folks, the balance of the report, much work has already been done on it. We're just making sure that it makes sense. And one other comment, it was extremely helpful to have Dr. Kino there, because, of course, his input is critical because he wrote the recommendations. And we didn't just sit in there and say, okay, Dr. Kino, you write it. He absolutely refused to write it. He provided us guidance and direction. Why is that important? He's not the commissioner, of course, but if the commissioner knows that he has reviewed our documents and has participated in providing us guidance, I think that gives us a good sense as to what the commissioner might do. And then I might add, and there's a paper trail for it, Dr. Kino has reviewed what we hope will be the model substantive and structural approach for the balance of the report, And the last I heard, he gave 2 or 3 red line corrections. May not be the only comments he had, but this is an extensive, what you're about to hear in the accountability section is a very extensive. Whether it fulfills anybody's particular needs or not, it's extremely extensive, and Dr. Aquino only added, I think, 2 or 3. Now, he may have more, but I emphasized him. It was important that he give it a thumbs up, and I'm encouraged by the fact that he had very few edits. So, without further ado, Dr. Mercedes Miller, yes?
The agenda calls for the consideration of Resolution 578, which is amended.
Can we do that afterwards? Who's waiting? Who's waiting? Okay. I thought both those guys were going to be here anyway, because I know Anissa she was here. She's sort of working on this for us. But yeah, come on in, Anissa. All right. There's been a request that we consider a particular resolution. Can I get a motion to consider Resolution 578?
So moved.
Been moved by Reverend Davis, seconded by, I heard somebody, Commissioner Hallmark. Any questions or comments regarding Resolution 578? That was quick. All those in favor of Resolution 578 say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, there you go. All right. Dr. Mercedes Miller, the microphone is yours.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm here to go over, review the accountability section. A little background since the last time we met. That evening we did meet as an executive team and establish some dates and timelines to complete for today. We had a board leadership meeting, reviewed some of the protocols, got some feedback from the commissioners there as well. Then we had a team meeting with Dr. Aquino, and President White was able to come as well to go through this and begin to understand what would be the best format for the document, as well as understand from Dr. Aquino specifically what was his intent in the comment as we went back and forth through the report to make sure that we were answering what his intent was in the recommendation. And make sure we were on track with that. So we walked through that, walked through the document, and then we submitted it, got some feedback last night and today. So I have not, this is the one that we're reviewing, is the one that was sent last night, but I can also speak to some of the comments that were submitted, as well as we move closer to the final submission, is that the format, just making it more digestible, and we've talked to Dr. Lee about how that will look, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So I can walk through the document, President White, if that would be the best way to do it?
Yep,
okay.
And then, of course, if anybody has any questions, they'll probably interrupt and ask them at that time.
No problem. So the format stayed the same. I think a couple clarifying points here. Over when you see recommendation, obviously that was from the report. The action item is our actions that we're taking. The next line is the owner. It wouldn't be that it's not all the collaborators, but the ultimate owner of making sure it's responsible for its completion. Some of the resources needed. And the item about projected completion date, that is when we would be in full implementation of what we said we were going to do. So, for example, on this first one, we would be saying this would be completed and in place by July 2019, and we can talk a little bit more about why we landed there. But we also did want to say that we are going to do a matrix of where all the timelines are across the document and make sure that it all is coherent over the next couple of years and it makes the most sense. And then the last one is these comments were old comments. So forgive me that if they're in there, but we left them just for clarity that that's where we started. So that's a little background about the document. And I'm going to walk through this one. So on the first one, it was about implement the protocol whereby I know you can read it, but whereby supervisors support and coach and hold direct reports accountable. In talking with Dr. Aquino, he described that it was more in the spirit of not only accountability, but what are we doing to build a culture of confidence, working with their supervisors, in developing growth and capacity in our employees. So to do that, even though we're doing some of these items, he wanted us to go back and really look at the one-on-one meeting structures as an example, and that was in his report. And he's offered some technical assistance documents that we've added over on resources needed. So some of our action steps to be completed, again, by July 2019, was to complete an audit of what are all department supervisors doing regarding supervision and coaching practices. For example, one-to-one meetings. How do you track your meetings? What's the frequency of your meetings? What are some of the best, and then identifying some of the best practices across the system. And again, these are some of the things in our conversation with Dr. Aquino that he was looking for us to do in this portion of the plan. Then based on that, we would make sure, we would understand what's going on, get that audit, look at some best practices. In best practices, this is not something we have normally done. We look at best practices in schools, but best practices in some of the supervision going around, particularly around our departments and offices across the system, from food service, transportation, central office, executive cabinet members, but the whole continuum of our directors and supervisors across the system. Again, determine where best practices are, and then provide research model-based protocols and select a process and common expectations across the system that we would then make sure was communicated. And protocols would include, for example, frequency of the meetings, documentation of the meetings, what is the purpose of the meetings, so that we're making sure we're making the best use of our time. But also making sure, and this was a point Dr. Aquino had made, that also making sure that we are asking staff members, indeed, what is going to help them grow in their performance. Are there obstacles? Are there challenges? And then the burden becomes on the direct supervisor to ensure that we are indeed doing that. That is one of the findings he had, and that was what he said was the intention of this first recommendation. So thus, that's why the action items are there. And also including frequency of meetings. And again, I do want to emphasize, though, the meeting documentation is to make sure we are going to that we're holding each other accountable through some vehicle for that. Then the last thing is, of course, is providing professional learning for staff members, directors, and supervisors, what the protocol is, what are good coaching practices, and continue to offer that professional development to our supervisory staff, no matter what the bargaining unit. Yes?
Do we presently have a computer system, a district-wide system that we can use, that supervisors can use for tracking?
We can build that, and that's one of the things we've been talking about with some of the performance management, about having common systems and building an internal system to do that. Currently, we have evaluation systems that are consistent and online and fairly elaborate, but not specifically for saying, I had this meeting and logging it in across the system. No, but this would include that kind of development.
Okay. So I didn't know if you wanted to state something like
I can do that.
So, Dr. Miller, I also want to make sure that you all add a part of the accountability in that process of what will be the steps if the expectations are not met.
Thank you.
So for me, I responded via email and gave feedback, and that's the copy that you guys have with the bold red. That's my feedback right there, which is not answered, so I want to address it here. So I'm just going to read it since you read, and that way it's on record. So I said, I can't speak on whether an audit is needed for supervision practices or procedures. I kind of found that surprising, but I do question why we don't have a procedure for supervision that is universal for an organization our size. I thought there was an employee handbook that lays out information about supervision. I I was really surprised and taken back that we would put something as simple as one-on-one meetings in there, because that tells me that we don't have a format for supervisors to have one-on-one meetings with their individuals, or that that's lacking and we just allowed it to lack for this long. However, if there is an audit, I do want the person that's going to be responsible for that audit to be indicated. I would like the start date indicated. If you're saying that the completion and implementation is July 2019 and you're going to start that now in February, that's around a 7-month calendar, and I didn't agree. I think that 7 months just to complete an audit alone on the process is too long. I would like to see that shortened. So for example, what I did too is I went to Buffalo and Hempstead's reports and I did read them. And what I will say about Hempstead, even though I don't necessarily agree with their all of their reporting, what I will say is that they identified an action, timeline dates, evidence, and documentation of monitoring implementation, which is a key component that we're missing. So I provided that copy. Highlighted in color to my colleagues today. Buffalo was my favorite report out of the 2 examples that we do have. So I feel like we started this kind of blindly, but we had some other districts who had already done this before us. Hempstead at least a year ago, and Buffalo 8 years ago. So in Buffalo's report, they actually did a step-by-step on actions with timelines and dates of completion. And even when they said that they were going to do a plan, they indicated when the plan would be done and by whom. So they also indicated steps that they had taken already, examples of those next steps, and dates of completion. And again, I still find that even this sample response that we agreed that we would only work on is still lacking. So I want to throw that out there, Beth, because I know that you guys all went back to the drawing board, and all I really saw in the changes were bullets. And I have to repeat via email, and I want to repeat this again because I said this 2 days ago. I don't have an issue necessarily with the formats of, I don't care if it's on Word document, publisher, I don't even care if it's on a napkin at this point, but I think that the content that's still missing for me is actions and dates of completions and who's going to be responsible. And I know that you said the ultimate responsible person on this one is the Deputy Administration and Strategic Partnerships. But I can't see that that person's going to do an audit in 7 months, and then the next steps is what?
So should I respond to that first section?
Go ahead, let's start with that first section, because
Okay,
I have some more feedback on here.
Do you want me to, I didn't mean to, do you want me to start there, though?
No, go ahead,
Okay.
you can start there.
Okay, so this is an opportunity to give us more feedback about what you think would be acceptable in the plan. So what I hear you saying is you want more dates added here. And when we had first talked with Dr. Aquino, we were working on some assumptions that we had agreed to, but we can add that here. We had not yet. We did talk about it, but if that's something the board feels is important to add in here, we can. I want to clarify that the audit, all of this whole section, for clarity, is to be completed by July 2019. Not just the audit, not just all the bullets would be required to be completed and implemented by then. So I hope that clarifies that a little bit.
No, that clarifies, but then, again, back to the start date. So what's going to start first? What do you need to, I would like to see it, like if you, again, if you look at Buffalo's, they indicated because they're all interdependent on one another, that one part of it was going to be done by March 1st, the other one March 15th. They were very specific with dates, and I don't think we're there at this level to give specific dates, but I would like to see at the very minimum the month and the year that it's going to be completed. So it's going to take 7 months for this section alone. But I still don't fully comprehend what that means. You're going to do an audit, and then what are you going to do with the audit?
So let's just say, over the course, in the discussion, right? So to get to July 2019 for full implementation, we start with the audit, identify the best practices, determine where they are, understand which models and protocols we want to use, because specifically Dr. Aquino recommended a one-on-one model. That's what we're responding to here. Clearly, the district has other protocols. We do have different cadences of meetings, but this is a recommendation to improve the system. So he specifically was asking about one-to-one. That's why it's documented here, because that's a model he feels has been useful in the past.
It's universal. It's used everywhere.
Well, and
Everybody uses.
we certainly have one-to-one meetings.
Right.
clearly across our system. What he was saying is that based on his findings, he's asking us to go back and have some clearer understanding and a common set of protocols specifically around that. That's his recommendation.
So Beth, let me stop you there because what I want to do some follow-up really quickly.
Okay.
So I understand, I will still like to see that A is going to be done first.
hear you.
And then B. And then you just said that the best models and procedures,
Yep.
that you guys are going to follow best practices, but there's no plan on what that means to address that with the entire district. So then it's like, okay, we're going to identify best practices. I would even add that the next step after that would be that it's going to come to the board and full administration to agree on, and then work with communications to make sure that everybody somehow, some way has a copy of that information or access to an online something. I just want to throw that out there because, I just feel like it's not detailed enough with action. And I know that some parts of this cannot at this time be detailed enough, right? Because we may stumble on some things that we didn't anticipate or have the foresight for. But I still would like to see it a little bit more flushed out, I guess.
And the dates.
And
I
the
hear you
dates.
about that, knowing that the completion is July 19th, or July 2019. It did culminate in professional development to all supervisors and directors, so.
But how?
So let me ask you this, just as a follow-up. Do you think it is plausible, seems to make sense to me, to have, like I'm looking at, I guess, this page here, unfortunately, maybe everybody doesn't have it, but it says accountability, Rochester City School District will complete an audit of all department supervisors regarding their supervision, et cetera, right? Then it says Deputy of Administration and Strategic Partnerships, and it says the technical assistance that is necessary. And then it says projected completion date, and that's July 2019. Would it be too difficult to begin for each one of these bullets to have a start date and an end date?
So we did talk about that, and we can add that. We can add that.
But I'm asking you, would it be difficult? I know you said you can add it, but the full board hasn't said that they want that, but it seems like a reasonable request, but I'm just trying to figure out, because remember now, this is supposed to be a model for the rest of the balance of the report. Would this be a challenge, and if so, why? Because it sounds like a reasonable request, because that way, the board, for example, could do its job in monitoring whether this stuff is happening sequentially. However you say it should happen, would it be too difficult to put that on there?
Quite honestly, I think given the level of there is more than in Buffalo in this report, that it does get very detailed in a short period of time. However, that being said, they would be targets. The completion date, this would just be a thought, the completion date is something as red light, green light, we have to get it done. Some of these process things may vary in terms of some of the timelines. So if you say March 15th, I'm totally making that up, but it's April 3rd. You know, that there's still some flexibility in that when we begin to say, well, we think we can do that, but it may be adjusted within the action steps. But the completion date is the one also that we would have to hold. That would be the one we're most accountable to.
You know, absolutely, we would, the board, in sort of doing its accountability function, would have to have the requisite flexibility. Let's say a chief left, or a deputy superintendent left, or the new superintendent has some other idea about how to do it. I think right now, though, it would make sense if it's not, I realize this is much bigger than Buffalo, much bigger than Hempstead, and in fact, Dr. Aquino said, just to me the other day, all Hempstead was about was the Board of Education. He said, I've told people repeatedly, this is not exclusively about the Board of Education. And in fact, anybody looking at the report sees the bulk of it doesn't deal with the board directly, right? So it's very complex. It covers a lot of different operations. My question is, though, and I think this is a reasonable request, would it be possible, again, you got 3 bullets on the one page that I have, start date, finish date, with the understanding that, of course, we would have to be flexible. Could you do that?
Yes.
And again, I'm thinking this is going to be the model for the rest, for everybody else. And I just want to make sure this is something that's plausible, that you could do this.
Again, I'm just going to put out there, though, that that's a process timeline.
Yep.
And over here, though, is the date that is the one that's ultimately the accountability. I just put that out there as the completion of this entire element. Right, in other words, on here, we put the dates, so we would do the audit starting March, making that up. And then we would determine best practices by beginning of April. Again, I'm just examples, right? And then by the model, you might be doing that in between, and then you're putting your PD in place, so everybody's launching a common protocol by July 1, 2019.
Right. Can I just add a couple of things, though? When I started and became the chair for audit, previously the state had came in and did an audit, and we were in violations of like 157 or 58 violations. And prior to me, again, coming, the district had created some timeline of when they would complete those procedures or tighten them up so that they were no longer not meeting the state requirements of how they were supposed to do these things. And when I came on, we were still, the deadlines had passed, those months had passed, and we were still really behind on those things. And I take that as an inability for leadership to have some foresight on what it's actually going to take. So I say all that to say I definitely personally want a timeline, but I want that timeline to be accurately reflected of what's accomplishable within that time frame.
Okay.
So I don't want you to put a March 15th and then April 3rd, April 15th is still not done. For me, that's not acceptable. I would rather that they say April to give themselves more time than to cut yourself short, right, in an earlier month. That's all I'm saying. I want to see the dates because there's an accountability piece to that. So I'm not okay with you guys saying March 15th, and I would even stay away from an actual day of a month. I would just go with a month. April. Okay. If it's April 30th, it's April 30th.
We can absolutely do
versus
that.
saying March 15th, because then I'm going to come on here and I'm going to be saying that you didn't do what you said you were going to do by a certain date. And I don't think that that's a best practice for the board to allow that again and again and again. This is what I walked into, so I just want to throw that out there.
I'm happy to absolutely do that. My only concern was just in the process when you set a target. That was up for process, but absolutely we can put the date
And
there.
I will add that if you identify a target date and for whatever reason you start rolling out this process and you realize that maybe something wasn't thought of or an obstacle pops up, I would personally prefer that administration come to the board with an adjusted plan and say, this came up, and so we're not going to meet this month's deadline because of this. And we just want to give you guys that. That is the type of communication I feel like we should be having. Okay. So that way, we're not looking at it quarterly, and we realize you missed all these deadlines, and we didn't know, we're just finding out about it. So I just want to throw that out there.
Let me just add very briefly. That as we ask you all these questions, that's literally what they are. I don't want folks to think that just because I say or somebody says, add a date, so, because I'm going to be honest with you, Beth, what I'm hearing is, I could do that. I want everybody to hear what I'm saying. That's, with all due respect, that's not the response that I'm looking for, right? We got to make sure, because we're not here, right? We can have what I believe to be a reasonable request. I've said that repeatedly. I think this is a reasonable request. But we got to make sure, not that you're comfortable, but that you believe that you can do that. Because otherwise, we'll find ourselves in a spot where people are anxious. So you can go on, but personally, what I'm looking for is a conversation. I'm not sitting here saying, you got to do that. And I'm not saying Commissioner LeBron is saying it. And she and I agree that on this issue of dates, I think that makes sense. Yep. And I think that alleviates the burden that you would have. You don't, because you got 4 bullets here and 1 big date. And a lot of things are behind these bullets. So the exercise of putting dates, I think, is a healthy one because it gives people expectations. They know where they have to go. But I just want everybody to hear this. When we're talking to you, at least when I'm talking to you, I'm not expecting you to say, oh, yeah, I can do that because that's what you want me to do. Because that won't work, because I'm not going to be the person doing this. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Please, folks, remember that. We're having a conversation. We may have an opinion, but your opinion is important. Okay? We're good?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Number 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So number 2 is create and implement a professional development plan to equip all district staff on the use of different data. So when we talk further to Dr. Aquino, he wanted a little bit more about what that might look like. And so this is our response after discussing it further with him, and what would be something he was looking for in terms of what would improve the system. So in conjunction with the performance management team, Office of Accountability, Teaching and Learning, and aligned with our district comprehension plan. And you can see we did audit or examine some of the things in the beginning, like on the other one, is just to level set. Let's just make sure we all understand where we are. What is our current state of data use? Identify experts within our own system, and develop a differentiated tiered system of training on data use throughout the system. We do this with schools. We want to dig deeper into that, but across all operational systems as well. And we've talked about that before in terms of Rock 3D and putting operational indicators up there. But how do people use that information to make decisions? So offer differentiated training, including 3 tiers of in-service. So talking about adult or differentiated, so that some people say, well, I've been here 20 years, some people have been here 2 years, what does that look like? And really digging deeper into those plans about novice, emerging, and expert. And how do we determine which data to collect, how to analyze it, and how to make data-informed decisions. I do want to go back. We do have some people here that are Lean Six Sigma. We know that we need to tap into them more to build these out and share their expertise across the system. And of course, our Office of Accountability that has a lot of talent in building their capacity. So next, create structures to monitor, determine if the identified strategies are working. So this is a lot around, we talked about it, our continuous improvement cycle and making sure that we understand and using the data effectively and how we're going to measure that. Provide professional development in the cycle, and it would look like, and we want to talk about this more with our team, is making sure that what we do sometimes is just one in-service, but that the in-service or the training sessions would be provided, they would be in a series, and that people would have time to go back, practice, use what they've learned, come back, report out, share, and then show evidence of learning. And that would be part of our monitoring system. Is the training working? Is it improving our system? And then the next thing was develop protocols that support best practice and using the data. So there are common data protocols, and implementing those, a common language across the system. Those would be all things that we said we were going to complete by July 2020. By the time we got through the entire system, it would be ongoing, but at that point, everybody would be in the full cycle.
Commissioner Hallmark?
So I see the value of having 3 tiers of in-service, novice, emerging, and expert. But I'm also wondering about the goals of how quickly, at what rate you would want to move folks through those tiers, if there's a plan about that. Because, I mean, if somebody hangs out at novice for 10 years, you know, can we look at it bigger picture?
And I think up here it's kind of doing an audit, but the audit also included like an assessment of where each individual was at, and that's where we would have to rely on the supervisor as well. But I think novice, yes, if you're here as a 15-year employee, you shouldn't be at novice trainings, right? So novice is
although it's
more
a new data dashboard for everyone right now,
but
so
depending on the topic, depending on what it's related to, right?
Okay.
But that's good feedback. Okay.
And I'm just going to request, not just from you, but from the other administration that's working on other sections as well, is just to keep in mind that we just got a report on being a target school district, and some of the things that the state is going to request of us. It looks like it's out. It looks like we're already working on it, but then it's going to be double work doing the same thing twice. So I want you to keep in mind what we are going to have to give to them in regard to our TSI schools, our CSI schools, and make sure that aligns with this plan so that you're not doing double work when they do come in to work with the administration.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Judah. Oh, no, you go first.
Oh, okay. The question I had is, it looks like we're supposed to use the data to drive decisions, and the decision should be in accord with the district comprehensive improvement plan. But when I read Dr. Aquino's report, he said that the DCIP that he reviewed, he determined was not effective. So does there exist another DCIP that he's reviewed that he's declared to be effective?
So we are working on that, and it has not been revised because that has to go through the board. We also have an action plan, but there are still tenets within the DSIP that we have to align to. So for example, addressing English language arts. So that the point here too is that even though he wants us to dig deeper into the DSIP, is that the goals still, we need people to still be attached to the big key performance indicators that we've established in the district. I think it wasn't so much that he was opposed to the key performance indicators, but some of our progress and strategic plan to get there.
So I'm just saying the ability to complete this depends on having a DSIP, as you.
We have to coordinate. But one of the things I think I said the other night too is that we do, and we've talked about this too, is that trying to make it coherent so one nests within the other, what's driving which one, and just making sure they all come together. And that was really the purpose of this, not just about this DSIP plan now, but overall, as we improve it over the course of the next couple years, that it would be aligned. So that
Do you know
people,
when it will be completed, what you're working on now, the DSIP that you're working on?
so right now, we continue, but it gets revised in July, officially revised in July. So we're working on the tenets now, but we have not made formal revisions to that DSIP at this point.
So from now until June, we basically have a plan that's not effective in place.
I will address that with Dr. Aquino. I don't have the details of what some of his feedback is about that. We also have our action plan, but I will, so I'm going to relate it more to the key performance indicators, but I will dig deeper on that for you. Because in terms of his effectiveness, some of it is he felt as though some of the writing needed to be more robust, not some of the actions. But I will add that here to follow up on. Because I do want to say too, even though as we fix the DSIP to better align to what his feedback is that in this report, as we go through 2020, you'll have 2 DSIPs to go. So it will continue to work because this indicator, or this, not indicator, this recommendation will go through the course of the recommendations, not just now as we fix it.
So I just want to note too that the distinguished educator in the first draft and the second draft had gave feedback that still is not technically answered. So where it says structures, literally, can you provide some examples of a potential structure that's still not identified? Develop protocols to support best practices and using data. If you're going to use data-wise, do you need to develop protocols or adopt their protocols? That was the question still not answered in here, which I think these are actually very strong and valid questions. Because again, we understand what in-services we're using, but this is going to an outside reader, and it should be very clear exactly what we're doing, when we're doing it, or a time frame for when we're doing it. The other comment that he mentioned here, and I agree, is about the school chief piece, identifying so that the reader has a clear picture of what role entails in the district, and the strategies they're going to use to document and monitor continuous improvements at their schools. That's in the third piece of it, because you literally start off the Office of School Chiefs Communicate, Implement. So defining what the school chief is and then actually giving better examples, because you mentioned one-on-one meetings again. I was under the understanding right now that that's already something already happening. And I said this last time, if you guys are going to not reinvent the wheel on some of the practices you're already doing, then we need to identify what hasn't been done in the intent of the practice and what we're doing to correct that so that it's being done. I don't have an expectation that they're going to reinvent the wheel for every single one of these protocols, but we can't just say we're already doing it, because that's essentially how I read it, like we're kind of already doing that.
So let me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is that, yes, and so these red comments here were related to prior to the revision, okay? On this, so if we're still in number 2, are we in number 2 still, Commissioner?
Beginning of 3.
Okay, that's what I thought, so, yeah. Is that, so if we're on 2, so that was a professional development plan. I think the next one was number 3. I'm trying to make sure I'm relating to your comment. Overall, I just want to say that the comments that Dr. Aquino had from the original one, we went back with him. So these comments, based on his feedback together, these comments were from the first round. These are not from the second round.
No, I understand that.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying they're still not actually cleared up here. You guys may have had a meeting with Aquino, and he cleared up, and you cleared up for him verbally, but I feel like it should still be in actual writing. Again, this is an important one. If you're going to use data-wise, you need to develop protocols or adopt their protocols.
So
which way are we going to go?
So that's why, so the last revision, it's almost like after talking with him, we took that off the first one, we took it off the table, listening to him more. So data-wise is not in this second revision, because we discussed it further and decided that might not be a productive way to go, that we would then use and identify internal experts to provide the professional learning.
You know, if he were here, and he has another obligation tonight, unfortunately, the state scheduled, I think they didn't have much of a choice, but they scheduled one of those forums for the time of the board meeting, which I think was regrettable. But in any event, one of the things that he talked about, and that's why he's not here, he's at that forum. One of the things that he talked about was when I or others during the course of that meeting gave specific programmatic examples, he said, no, I want to talk about systems, the creation of systems, because you've got your data rich. You've got all these programs out there, literally programs that capture data, but they're not connected to systems. So I'll go back to your comment. And again, he could articulate this much better than I could, but there was, it says, these things aren't, they don't have pages on it, but create structures to monitor, determine if identified strategies are working effectively. I hear his voice in that. That's what he wanted. He wanted to make sure that if a program blew up or if somebody wasn't around anymore, that we took the time to create systems, not programs, not computer programs, but systems. So, but Commissioner LeBron, to your earlier point, I do think, in fact, if you change the projected completion, I would even suggest changing the caption from projected completion date to timeline, which is what I think Hempstead had on theirs. And on that particular one, it says create structures to monitor, determine if identified strategies are working effectively. I would put a start date and a finish date, when that system is going to be created, because that's what he and others should be interested in. We're all going to not be here one day, and we should all be concerned about that there is a system left. So when I, during the course of that lengthy meeting, or others would give specific examples of something that would be on here, he would say, no. You know, I would talk about Finish Line Report, which clearly is an accountability tool. You know, it's a point of reference to talk about who's supposed to be doing what and when it's supposed to happen. He said, no, it's good. He said, as a matter of fact, in his report, he said one of the things he liked best was the leadership meetings where we talked about the finish line. But he said, I don't do that. I want you to spend time to create systems. So I think, I would agree with you. I think that's why data-wise is off. There's a lot of stuff on here that we could have put on here, but he was like, no, let's talk about creating systems where you will feed those programs and people into as they come in and out of our district. But he would probably say it different, but that's what I heard. But we're going to have other review sessions, and he'll be here, so maybe we can revisit that point.
So I don't know if I answer, so okay.
Yeah,
Beth, did that make sense? Is that what you heard
Yes.
or no?
Yes. And I do think, I can see where the disconnect happened from
yeah.
the questions from the first time, clarifying with him what was his intent, going back and looking at the report, and then responding to the author's intent. And that's how we came up with him, with the current.
Commissioner Shepard?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point again that throughout everything that you should be also adding what happens if someone doesn't follow things, because was what I'm hearing right now, what I've been on edge about is the fact that we do have things in the system. We do have programs that work, and yet we are here with the same results. And so I need to understand that if people are not using the data that we have, because we are data rich, that even if we do send a report up that says we're going to have a timeline that outlines things and it's the same people still not doing the same work that we need them to do, I need to know what's going to happen if they don't do it. And so I want that piece to be throughout the entire report. If someone doesn't follow it, how many chances do they get before we start taking some real action? And I guess that will also have to do with our negotiations and how we're negotiating with our bargaining units, so.
I do want to say one of the things when we talked about it as a team, accountability, whatever the repercussions may be, should permeate and does the entire document, right? So do you put it in every one versus just one section, or no, it appears in every one? So we did have that conversation about, and then how does it get monitored in a transparent way through a system so we're all holding each other accountable.
And I want to be very clear, too, that I also see that as accountability measures, we're talking about professional development, which I do think is important. But beyond professional development, everything cannot be cleared with PD. So I really want us to be specific about what's going to happen after those steps are not followed.
Well, okay, so the question is, Commissioner Shepard, I'm trying to translate what you said so that I get it accurate, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I don't. So would you add, for example, and I didn't mean that sarcastic, I mean, I know you will correct me if I'm not right. Would you add a column that would say, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but would you add a column that would say consequences of not doing that? I mean, you want that across this board in terms of responding to this?
So it wouldn't necessarily be a column. It would be a part of the action item as you're developing what the protocols would be. It would be a part of the protocol in the action item step. So it doesn't have to be its own column because it will look different for different measures.
I might suggest something, because after these meetings, we go back and then the staff asks whether or not they need to add things that they may not agree with because the board asked. So I'm trying to get clarity so that we can write a plan that's a recommendation, but then the board certainly could edit the plan after we give them the final plan, adding anything that we wish, right? Because I'm trying to think of the level of detail and trying to figure out, is it we write what some of my staff will say, we don't agree with that, but do we have to write it? Can we talk about like whose voice? Because we're happy to, if the full board directs that, we're happy to include those things in the plan.
Anybody else want to? Commissioner LeBron?
So I do want to respond. I feel like some of the accountability piece can be done through having the timeline and having the board follow that timeline to ensure that it's getting done. I think that accountability piece ultimately falls on us as commissioners to say, you said this was going to be done by July, and here we are in July, and it hasn't been done. And I think we need to figure out a system beyond holding the superintendent accountable when the new superintendent comes in, what we're going to require of them if the staff are not doing what they're supposed to do. So I want to throw that out there. The other piece I will say that, and I read Hempstead's, and I was not, it's not to diss Hempstead if they're out there watching anywhere. I just did not, I didn't like their wording. Again, I had an issue with their content to some degree. I did like some of their format, though. But one of the things that they had that Buffalo didn't have was the monitoring implementation piece. So what evidence was going to be gathered on an ongoing basis to document. And not that I want to add an additional column to the final report, but I feel like that could be something that the board can develop for itself to figure out all of the key pieces and the dates and the timeline for us to have that monitoring implementation piece so that we're mindful, because otherwise, if we don't have that in a one sheet separated from the entire report, it's going to be up to all of us to go back and read and review and remind each other of those dates, and we're not going to do, I just can't see us doing that in that way. So I just want to throw that out there, that there is a component missing still for me for the accountability piece, but that I think could be a possible solution.
So I'm gonna agree. One of the things that I think is important, I like the idea of by month, because then they could be sorted by month. So the board could see everything in September, for example, from all of them. Also, in terms of documenting completion, we've used the claim evidence judgment format in the past for the performance management cycle with the quarterly reports from our chiefs and our quarterly performance management process that's internal, that clearly we could do a better job of communicating that performance management cycle. But Beth, evidence is something that you determine when you set a goal. It would not be difficult for us to identify what evidence would be in the performance portfolios of practice. At this time, I don't think, but we could add that and see how difficult that would be. I don't think it would be difficult.
Commissioner Hallmark?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I like that idea to get the claims, evidence, and judgment information more transparent to the board. And I just want to support what both of you are saying, although I would kind of use a little bit slightly different language. I think that the accountability piece about what happens when it doesn't get done, that's on the board. And to spell out what precisely will happen, that's getting into the weeds a little bit and predetermining, like, you know, pushing the hand of the superintendent. So I would just kind of reframe that to say, if it doesn't get done, first we need to be given the evidence that it was done or not done. And when we have our regular monitoring sessions, which we're talking about in the other section, if it's not done, then it's on you. You know, it's on the superintendent, and you would need to decide what needed to happen with that. But we don't need to spell it out specifically, because that's your responsibility. But we would need the evidence. Yes, we hold you accountable, but we don't get into the weeds about it.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that in our governance section, I did actually give feedback on what our system should look like for the board for when we are holding whatever superintendent that we have, and I did spell it out, because the issue is that when we don't spell it out, then nobody gets held accountable. And until we get a superintendent in place that will follow whatever mechanisms that they want to follow, and we see that it's working and things are getting done and we don't have to always hover over someone, then I'm fine with that. But at this point, I would hope that the full board would support the fact that we need to have it spelled out, because if we don't, people get too lackadaisical, it doesn't happen, and then nothing happens to anybody until things have blown up, and then there's 5 million excuses. Then we're feeling sorry for folks because now we're too far behind schedule or whatever the case may be. And so I did put in our governance section something that would spell out for the board how we would hold the superintendent accountable. And I want the administration to know, I can say this as an individual commissioner, not even coming from the full board, I want the administration to be thinking about what should be consequences, because no matter who's in what position, you should be wanting to hold your colleagues accountable too, because when their work doesn't get done, then that backs you up in other areas. So this is something that everybody should be thinking about in regards to how we're going to be working as a system. If this is supposed to be a team and my teammate is not holding up their end of the bargain, I want to have input, or I want to give suggestions on how people should be held accountable in that regard.
So I think you indicated, and I was thinking this, that this is really the governance section. Section 3 talks about governance and how the board holds the superintendent accountable. Maybe when we get to that section, we can beef it up or have some additional conversation, so that the concerns that you addressed and the concerns that Commissioner Hallmark is not rejecting, she's saying there does need to be some accountability. but perhaps it appears in greater detail in Section 3. So why don't we do that? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say one last thing. I also wanted to make a request of the full board that as we're going through this, we start thinking about what we are going to charge our interims with, because obviously they wouldn't be able to handle everything. So like if things stick out to you, because I know we're supposed to come back together and discuss what we're going to give them as a charge, that you start paying attention to that so we can have that conversation.
Makes sense.
Could I
Yes,
get
Reverend
clarity? Are we talking about two different kinds of accountability? I understand the accountability that the board will hold the district for implementing the action plan that we're going to hand in. But I thought that Commissioner Shepherd was talking about when it comes to the protocols that we're going to implement to make sure that PD is happening for principals, and that when they give performance plans to their direct reports, those direct reports are actually doing and performing the suggestions or recommendations to improve their performance. So I thought Commissioner Shepherd was uplifting in the protocols. We need accountability, consequences, but that belongs there in that section. But this accountability belongs in the governance section, the accountability against Dr. Aquino's report and our response. Do you understand the two different places I'm talking about? So I'll say it one more time. I'll say it again. In this report, in the accountability section, we're talking about what happens if after the PD, supervisors are still not making decisions in accord with the data. What are going to be the consequences? I think the consequences should be a part of the protocol that you're going to develop as a part of this accountability section. As a part of what the board is going to do, the board has to hold the superintendent accountable for the response and the implementation of the action plan for Dr. Aquino. So that set of accountability steps belongs in the governance section, whereas this section we're talking about right now should be a part of your protocols when a supervisor, such and such, even after receiving professional development, still isn't utilizing and making data-driven decisions, or their direct reports who have been provided with recommendations of how to change behavior to improve performance still aren't taking those recommendations. There should be consequences in the protocols for that. So that's what I thought that Commissioner Shepherd was trying to get at in the protocol, and the consequences for protocols being outlined as a part of this accountability section.
Yep, and I just want to say I actually was talking about both too, but you outlined them separately because we're responsible for all of it. So I was talking about details in the protocols and also in the governance section of the board for how we're following through with this work.
I joined Commissioner Shepherd. I'd like to see consequences in those protocols. I'm not saying in this plan, but in the protocols.
Commissioner Hallmark, were you going to say something? My response to that is, Commissioner Davis, your very last comment made me think, okay, well, I could agree with that, but I think this plan to get into that level of detail.
Oh, no, not now.
No, okay, all right. That's why I think the last thing you said, right.
As a part of implementing and developing that protocol, when they do that, part of the protocol should include the consequences of persons not now, no.
Right, okay, all right, then we're on the same page.
Then I would agree too, yeah. Otherwise, it's, that's the superintendent's responsibility to do that, yeah.
All right, I think we're good on that particular point.
Okay. Number 3, establish a process to communicate, implement, document, and monitor continuous improvement in conditions that support learning. So in this case, we are honing in on the learning piece, and this really talked about communication across the system, beginning with school chiefs, to make sure the system is supporting the schools so that learning is at its optimum. So in this case, in talking with Dr. Aquino, we agreed we would begin to show some of the things you're already doing, and then how are we going to improve it. So what the school chiefs do now is communicate, implement, document, and monitor continuous improvement, and make sure there are use a variety of strategies to make sure our schools, our principals have what they need and we're building their capacity. So they currently do that through one-on-one meetings, obviously school visits, targeted walkthroughs, data-driven communication, using data dashboards, observation and feedback, coaching to improve practice, and quarterly reports, and that's very high level. At the same time, also going on is with the school chiefs in a collaboration across the systems, is districts meeting with district staffs and walkthroughs, board leadership meetings, finish line reports, principal professional learning, and school academic walkthroughs. The Office of School Chiefs, as we know, is designed to focus on principal and school improvement. And that we will co-construct a more robust plan with key stakeholders that identifies and monitors school improvement. So this is also really honing in on the transformation school improvement process, and we do have models, and we are doing that, for example, in some of our receivership schools, and now recreating some of that, improving it with the current cohort. So digging deeper into the aspects of the plan will include, and then this is where the dates would go to your point, progress monitoring on key performance indicators monthly, assessment of instructional leadership teams on student achievement, and that is through some quality indicators and criteria, development and monitoring of school plans. We do that, but that would be included in the plan and the protocol. Create opportunities for shared learning across schools. This is something that Dr. Aquino specifically brought up. We do that. He said it would be something he would recommend that we continue and to improve, and add it in the plan about how we do that among colleagues. We do have 2 principal meetings. The chiefs do that. That is their structure, using data, looking at student work, but also really specifically talking about and aligning their work with their strategic school improvement plans. Provide monthly updates to the Board of Education in collaboration with the school chief. Monthly updates to the board, I just want to clarify that. Perhaps we were thinking through the monthly updates provided at the board, at the meeting, at the Board of Education business meeting. District offices and departments will improve practices that support schools. So the plan will also include and monitor the impact of the other conditions that support student learning that central office supports. So while the principals are working in developing, or the chiefs are working in developing their principles, we're focusing on school transformation, and they're ensuring they have what they need. Part of what we're doing now with the performance management team is really making sure that we're monitoring what is going on in terms of the support and service to schools. So that would include focused and targeted resource allocation, monitoring of all facilities, specialized instruction and services, human capital, and attendance. And that would all be part of the plan to make sure that all the conditions of the district support learning.
What is currently happening, and how is this different?
So a lot of it is happening, and he acknowledged that. I think that part of it was creating one plan where it was all coherent and communicated transparently. And I think that's, again, the systems things that he was looking for. However, he was also asking, and we were doing this, is digging deeper on the school transformation process. And then the next question is, how does that lead into school improvement plans?
Okay,
So there are,
Liz,
yes.
Did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I want to follow up on a few things. So I want to go right back to the beginning with the one-on-one meetings, the targeted walkthrough, the data-driven communication. I just want to know when and how often. I think that's something that, You know, I can say I'm having one-on-one meetings as a supervisor, as a chief with the principals, and do it once a year, and that's not significant enough or enough supervision for someone, especially when we know that we have some excellent principals, but we do have some principals that are struggling and could use that support. Hold on, Beth, let me finish real quick.
Yeah, please.
I also want to add, he, in this comment here, says that, and I know you said that this was from the first and you guys met, but the clause, he said, well, will they understand what board leadership finish line report means, that it doesn't flow well, the entire section doesn't read well? And I actually agree with that, and it's still in there, and I think that, again, we have to remind ourselves that someone else from outside of this district is reading that, and that something like finish line report is something internal to us, and that is not a universal lingo in education or higher education. That's just how we've branded that specific report. So I think we need to be specific about what that actually means. And I would like anybody, not just the state, if the community wants to pick up the response, I would like them to be able to follow along and understand very clearly what we're talking about and what that means. And I know that Commissioner Hallmark just asked that we're doing a lot of these things, and you said school improvement plans and so forth, but we just got a receivership yesterday, and we have 10 more schools in receivership. So I'm not confident that what you guys are doing for school improvement is technically working. I know that we had some schools out of receivership, but in comparison to the schools that went in or that are identified as a focused or a struggling school through the new ESSA language, I'm just not confident that what we're doing is going to be enough to continue as we're doing it to actually improve the district. So I want to throw that out there.
Did you want to respond to that?
I wanted to go back to, and so I apologize if I sputtered there for a minute and interrupted you. However, that's where some of these things do layer a little bit, and how to show that or indicate that. Because when you do the first one about the meetings, some of that will include school chiefs. It'll include executive cabinet. So it's not just the direct supervisor of, I'm going to say transportation. So
Can I
that's one
add
piece.
with the that one piece, that one-on-one, but how often? How often, I would like to understand how often, what is going to be the expectation for all supervisors in this district at every level to meet one-on-one? Is it going to be 4 times a year, once a year, twice a month?
Exactly.
If they've been identified as a staff that needs additional support, because I work on a team too, and I can tell you, I have some team members that I don't need to meet with them once, but every 3 months, because they're strong, they're on the go, they're getting goals met. And I have some others that are newer to my field, and they need a little bit more support. For some of those individuals, I have to meet with once a week.
Yeah.
And as a supervisor, I have to make that time, and that's hard for me too. So as a supervisor, I have an obligation and a responsibility to support my team member through that transition and through that learning, curve. But I would just like to understand what the minimum expectation is going to be for all supervisors at all levels. And meeting with, is it going to be once a month, once a year? I need to know that.
Beth, to sort of, and I think we're doing more of this today, which is a good sign, and we have to acknowledge that when it happens. I think I would certainly agree that, and you tell me if you think you could do this, but I think it would be a good idea. For example, I'm looking at walkthroughs, and I sort of thought this was going to happen after we finish our meeting. And Godspeed to you, Beth. This is just, I'm only thinking of Hillary Clinton 18 hours in front of Congress. This is, you have a difficult task, and you're the first person doing it, and you're doing a great job fielding all these different questions, and you're up there by yourself, and nobody's whispering anything in your ear. So I want to say that I appreciate this effort. It cannot be easy. But to Commissioner LeBron's point, for example, school, and when we were talking the other day, at the second floor, I was thinking we were going to say, like, monthly, I'm just saying monthly, school academic walkthroughs, because we talked a lot about academic walkthroughs, and I'll tell you, I was absolutely amazed and extremely impressed at the walkthrough that I participated in. Now, we can't put all the details in terms of what I observed that day, but I think if we were to say monthly walkthroughs, and then I'm just taking another example. See the assessment of the instructional leadership teams on student achievement, quarterly, I'm just throwing that out there, quarterly assessments, right? And then your timeline would say to begin so-and-so date. I think that's the kind of, and I'm sort of channeling what I think Dr. Aquino would say, and what I hear Commissioner LeBron say, what I'm saying, and maybe other folks are saying, is that's the kind of specificity that will ensure the creation of systems, that everybody will be synchronized. So, okay, we're going to get a quarterly assessment of instructional leadership teams. The chiefs are going to do monthly walkthroughs. And if they're not doing them effective this particular day, there are going to be some consequences by the superintendent or whoever. Do you see what I'm saying, Commissioner Hallmark?
So just to add to that and kind of support what Commissioner LeBron was saying and what you're saying, a little tweak might be, for instance, the one-on-ones. You know, you say you have some employees who you sometimes need to meet with more often and less often, depending on, so sort of like the differentiated training to include 3 tiers of service. You could have novice, emerging, expert, different words for the employees that need more, middle, and less. And then you could create, you know, how often you need to work with the novice, the emerging, and the expert, and give, that's, you know, a systemic kind of goal for employees in the different categories that way. So it's not just as blunt as monthly, but that includes all kinds of employees.
So,
I had
couple
just one more
things.
question.
Oh,
Commissioner Davis, no, go ahead.
It says that it's working in accord with the school improvement plans. And again, Dr. Aquino had mentioned that in reviewing our school improvement plans that they're not effective. So is a part of this, how are we going to relaunch or redo the school
Absolutely.
plans so that they are effective? And that's not going to happen again that's not going to happen between now and June. We still have the plans that he outlined and declared to be ineffective in place right now.
so I think the next one, I don't know if I'm going to address your question, but let me try, is going to talk about school improvement plans. But I want to,
Okay.
before I go there, I just want to come back to tiered systems of support, just for clarity. So this first one was just some quick examples of what we're doing. I can see where the bulleted points would be helpful. However, I do want to say that the plan would begin to outline. There's several things here that impact how we support school principals. There was another section we talked about tiered systems of support to principals, right? So that's one section that impacts this section. Then the section before, I'm just saying in terms of where our brains go, right, or my brain goes, the question number 1 on outlining frequency of meetings and those things would also be addressed in the first recommendation where they all fold in together. So that if it may not be listed here, it was cited in another thing. And I think that's also our challenge, is to make sure all those pieces are shown as one way or a package in which we support a school principal. So I just put that out there. Yes, on the clarity about the things that we do, and I think that was it about. That was it.
And so something that Dr. Aquino had mentioned is that he noted that in some of the school plans, they had copied verbiage from previous plans. So in this accountability, the persons in charge will be looking to see that the plans are actually something different and aligned with.
Absolutely, and we have that in the next section.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we did have a couple of schools that didn't use the school improvement plan to really drive their work. And so that is something we absolutely are addressing.
So can I add that in the board governance section, I actually requested that because we have 2 board business meetings right now, currently in our schedule, that the superintendent's reports highlight of 2 or 3 schools that are under receivership and the improvement plan and what's being done, and that is an ongoing presentation. Because over this last year, there have been presentations about, you know, seminars and schools, all positive, which is great. We should be hearing those things too. But as a board, all being here together, not all of us being at leadership where we only identify one school at a time, that information is shared here publicly on record so that we know that the school, where the school improvement plan is, if it's working, not working, what administration and the superintendent is doing. I think that goes back to the accountability piece too under
So-
board governance.
So Dr. Lee, you can add that to the governance section?
it's already added.
Well, it's already, I added it.
Go ahead, Beth.
We did number 4?
You just,
Okay. So provide principals with professional development on the school improvement process. So a target professional development plan for principals on turnaround practices will include examination of current school plans. So basically, making sure that there are specific criteria, which we have, but really holding people accountable to SMART goals, leading indicators, gap statement, and action plan at a minimum. The New York State Education Department, by the way, is changing their school plan process. And also, they do audits across the state for this very reason, to make sure people are using the school improvement plans to really guide their work, and that they have the criteria in them, and that they're used with quality, and then fidelity, accountability, and that's something that the school chiefs are embedding into their practice. And it will be also in the plan that we talked about before. And then provide individualized one-on-one professional learning opportunities based on the examination of the plan. So even though we're going to have professional learning about school improvement plans, and we do that with our school-based planning teams, is that based on the criteria, we'll do a differentiated support to principals to ensure that they understand and that they're putting those practices into place. And then identify exemplars, sharing them among school teams to build coherence. That is a practice we use, but we need to use it on a more consistent basis, something we discussed with Dr. Aquino. And then ensure annual high-quality professional learning on the school improvement planning process. We have done that. We've done different ways. We've talked about different ways. As a matter of fact, Dr. Golden has some people really going to a conference to really more deeply understand how to really support school-based planning teams on how to do this. But all along, this is about training and then holding people accountable and how to use a school improvement plan to really guide your work. That's also about school turnaround practices as well.
Commissioner Hallmark?
So, yeah, I had a question here, and I didn't see the answer to it.
Okay.
I was referring to the principals meetings.
Yes.
How active are they in small group learning and exchanging information about receivership so schools can learn from each other, all that stuff?
So we've done a lot of that, and the school chiefs set up the structures of those meetings that have learning targets for every session, and then people are required to provide it's just an FYI, their session to the chiefs for review to make sure it's something that's going to be relevant for the principals, for their practice and improvement. Because we know over the years, sometimes people want to get in front of principals, but it doesn't necessarily provide value to improve student achievement. So the chiefs are doing that. Now, at the same time, we have sessions that focus on student learning. We have sessions that really talk about actually the school improvement process. So we've been doing the sharing starting last summer with receivership principals, and a lot of the current practice over the course of this year has been around how do you share best practices, identifying priorities, how do you align it to the DE report?
So my question was less about the content, and it was about the how.
Okay.
A little mouse told me that some of the principals' meetings are a little bit like unidirectional lecture type kind of thing, and it could be broken up and made more interesting and have more co-sharing, that kind of thing. So I'm talking about the how.
I would say that we've really tried to do, I would wonder when you talked to them last, because I think currently the chiefs have really tried to do that. So for example, some is in a big group. So for example, today's structure was special education updates on what we're doing across the system. We do that in a large group. But then the chiefs had us do different sessions. For example, I did 3 sessions today on budget aligned to your school priorities. There was one on library and how do you use that. There was one from Jason Willis from African American Studies. So we've really tried to do, or they've tried to do, a more differentiated approach and in small group that lends to more innovative practices and sharing. So it is changed. There have been
Peers
times.
teaching peers, too.
Yep, yes.
That's what I'm asking
Commissioner
about.
LeBron?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to add, and I added this to our board governance section too for training for us, is that we have a mechanism to either record and capture in case we have a board member who's not here, but I would make a request for you guys to consider a mechanism to capture some of the training for staff who may not be at that particular training. So I just want to throw an example, like for us, I said finance, but I want us to record that training so we can always go back to it if we have questions, or if for whatever reason a board member can't make that training, that they can view it at their own time. Because some of these topics, especially if they're staggered and someone misses, and I'm just thinking about, because life happens, someone may not be able to be there, they get sick, or they have to go out of town suddenly and unexpectedly. What is going to be the mechanism to ensure that they get the training? Is it going to be one-on-one with their supervisor? I just want a mechanism as a backup for that training that they may have missed. So that way, there is no excuse that they missed the training 3 months ago and they didn't know any of the new outcomes or expectations. And so therefore they just didn't do it, because that's kind of what happens unfortunately now. But
Just two things. We don't tape, but that's, maybe certain sessions should be taped, and that's good feedback.
Maybe certain ones. I don't think you need to tape every single session.
Understood.
But if you have even handouts and that person is not there, the expectation I would have is that a supervisor sits down with that individual during their one-on-one and say, this is what you missed, a month ago, and I just want to make sure that you understand. I don't know. I think you guys got to flush that part out, but there needs to be a mechanism to ensure that when someone misses the training, some way, somehow, that they're going to, at the very minimum, get the information and have some understanding of it.
So I'm just so compelled to just say two things about that. Thank you, Commissioner. Is that they have a site where all the materials are, where principals are expected to access. So I do want to point that out, and also where the principal handbook is, and the chiefs monitor that. Second thing is for communication about people reading. So if they didn't hear it at the principals meeting, there are directives, instructions, whatever it may be, informational. There are two ways in which principals also are expected, and we do monitor that they're checking their emails, because superintendent put out, because there were multiple pieces coming at principals, just what they're trying to do with principals meeting, one document that flows all the information through, and you get it, leadership link. So that is another way in which we hold our principals accountable, so that they have to use that to make sure they hit their deadlines, and that's an expectation and an accountability measure to make sure principals are doing that.
So Beth, let me clarify too. Well, I'm also talking about our teachers. If they're getting training from the principals, so that you guys as deputies are training the chiefs, and the chiefs are training the principals, and then the expectation is that the principals are going back to their school to disseminate that information amongst the teachers. But what happens if you have a teacher who's out sick suddenly, or is expected to go to the training and their child got sick and they have to leave and they're going to miss that information? And I just don't want that individual to not have a way to access that training that they may have missed.
Beth, on this area number 4, one of the things that we talked about the other night was the recommendation in this instance says provide, and you recall I talked about verbs, identifying the verbs, and that sometimes we replicated the verbs in the action items, so it really didn't say anything different than the recommendation, and Dr. Kino agreed with me. So by way of example, 4 says provide principals with professional development on the school improvement process. Then if you look at the the 4th bullet, it says ensure. It's a different way to say, instead of saying provide, you say ensure annual high-quality professional learning on school improvement planning process to school-based planning teams. I thought of all the reworking that was done on this, this area was the weakest.
Okay.
I think that what I heard in these action, quote-unquote, action items was basically saying the recommendation in a different way. Another one is the 2nd bullet. It says provide individualized one-on-one professional learning opportunities based on examination of the plans. Really, it's not very specific. I mean, that's just very generic. I mean, the part where you talk about examination of the plans is a little specific. The one that I thought really stood out, that lended itself to, as Commissioner Elliott would have said, a who, what, where, when, and how, we talked a lot about this the other day, is the first bullet. It says examination of current school plans. I would change that examination. I would say, we will examine current school plans using the following criteria, yada, yada, yada. So that lends itself to the who, what, where, when analysis. It also lends itself to a time frame. We're on this day, we're going to begin an examination of school plans, blah, 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 and it will be finished by this day. The rest of them, and maybe we're just short on ideas about how to offer up a who, what, where, when. And by the way, I don't share the opinion that some people, not on this dais, some people said that you should not reference existing practices. We have a hell of a lot of good practices in this district. People don't talk about them, but where we have practices in this area, and you guys know, we're not at that level, we should highlight them. So as I look at this, the recommendations, there's only one that really stands out that lends itself to saying, to the board saying, okay, on this day, we're expecting you're going to begin an examination of current school plans, and you should be finished with that by then. Everything else is, sounds good. Identify exemplars of sharing among school teams to build coherence. And again, Beth, I have a lot of respect for what you're doing now, but that is not to you. That's kind of lame. Identifying exemplars for sharing among school teams to build coherence. Lame in the context of we're being asked to provide specific recommendations. These are the verbs. This is where we shouldn't be offering up nouns, right? What are we going to do to ensure that our principals are getting sound professional development in the area of school improvement? Now, again, we may be doing stuff that I'm not aware of that people just don't want to elevate to people's consciousness. I think that stuff should be put in there. And if it needs to be tweaked and improved, we should say that here. But I only see one item that lends itself to saying, this is what we're going to do, and this is when we'll have it done. And by the way, you've done that, you and your team, and all those folks who are not standing up there with you that did all, I think you've done an exemplary job in fleshing this out for all the others. But I think this one is still kind of weak.
Okay.
Can I just ask though, Van, because you came in and you said you met with them to flush this out, and Dr. Aquino, and then here we are, we still have this version that needs further flushing out. And I'm still concerned about the timeline, because we only agreed to do this one section today for administration side. I think my expectation is that we're going to go over our part, which is the board governance, which also still needs a lot of fleshing out. And there's still so many other pieces of this to go. And you started off today's meeting saying you met with everybody, and I think you have a lot of feedback for that one area, but I would assume that while you were meeting with them, you guys were editing live and going over it. And I think my expectations are too high, but that's just me. But I just want to understand that, like, why are we here at this point still flushing this out even further if you had that meeting with them?
Well, Commissioner Commissioner LeBron, what would we have expect would have happened? No, let me respond before you start. No. That was clearly rhetorical. Okay. To this extent, we all met in an effort to try to respond to the concerns that were expressed at this dais, right? And we all met in good faith, and we worked diligently, right? But we weren't naive enough to believe that it was going to be perfect, that you, by way of example, might identify, and I've agreed with some of your observations, some things that needed to be improved. People call it the process of continuous improvement. Now, we don't have a lot of time to do this, but no one would be so arrogant as to think that we could come back in here and say, accept this is the way it's going to be. This is about continuous improvement. Now, we don't have a lot of time. At a certain point, the board's going to have to say, we're going to have to say, it's not what I did or what other people that I think, what they did. It's going to be about what we're going to be able to say, okay, this is going to have to be it for now. We're going to have to move on. But I would respectfully submit that you not say, hey, why didn't you do more? This isn't going to work, man. This is all we could do. Now, at a certain point, this is how I think how I would respond. At a certain point, it's not what more are you going to do, or what more other people are going to do. I think at a certain point, this board has to decide, this is as close to perfection as we are going to get, given the time constraints. And at a certain point, we're going to have to accept that what we've set up substantively and structurally is going to serve as a model for the others. And then we'll submit it to the commissioner. Barbara is going to, or Beth is going to, at the end of their presentation, they're going to describe for us how they're going to get through the balance of the recommendations. I asked Barbara, come up with a plan for finishing up the rest of this. They will do that, so you'll hear how they plan on doing it, because we're not doing the work. And I've offered, and you could offer too, as you've done, you've submitted stuff, to provide additional improvement in this process. But at a certain point, the question is not going to be, Van, what are you going to do? The question is going to become, what are we going to say as a board is our point at which we're going to say, this is going to have to be, for now, good enough.
No, but, so let me just clarify, Van.
Sure.
I was saying that you started the meeting saying you met with everybody and you was helping flush this out, and you had a lot of feedback on this area, and you said that it still wasn't good enough, but I'm saying, why didn't that come up when you had that meeting with them so that they can modify it, so then we as a board collectively could have flushed it out even further? You were there with them already in the trenches, that's what I'm saying.
I would assume that everybody here and on this dais would know that I offered up, for those of you who were there, you'll affirm this, I offered up a number of recommendations. Okay. All right? I mean, but you don't, this is the human condition. People do the best they can, myself included, and including the people that were there, to try to make it work. So this wasn't like, I want to be clear in case anyone didn't understand, this wasn't like I sat at this meeting and didn't say anything. Anybody who was there knows that I was very vocal about what I thought should happen. So I don't want you to think that just because I'm continuing to ask questions, and by the way, affirming some of the stuff you're saying, and saying, hey, that's a good idea, that I sat there and just twiddled my thumbs. I absolutely did not do that. Everybody did their best to come up with something that the board could have to do additional deliberation. That's what we're doing today. Beth, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to share that there were several of us in the room, and then we went back and continued to edit. So we weren't sitting there necessarily scribing at the time. We were trying to capture everyone's comments, including Dr. Aquino's, and then we went back. So that's the feedback. So thank you.
So we want to move on to section 5? Were we there yet?
Oh, yes.
So Beth, on my last set of comments,
yeah.
For what it's worth, and I offered significant editorial comments when we were meeting before. I think I talked at length about the need to have meat on the bones.
Absolutely.
And be as specific as possible.
Yeah,
the who, I co-opted the language of one of my colleagues, the who, what, where, when, and how. We talked a lot about that. It didn't happen in this particular section, so I'm reaffirming at least my desire to see more specificity there.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, number 5, this is a little bit shorter, but ensure school chiefs play an active role in supporting, reviewing, approving, and monitor plans. So establish a detailed calendar based on the revised New York State Education Department requirements and due dates, each step in the cycle. In terms of how we're using the school improvement plan process, ensure high-quality professional learning on the school improvement planning process, which we mentioned in the other one. Ensure all school improvement plans are reviewed by the Board of Education. We did want to put that in here, so there is a process for which we've done that in the past and are putting it in here, where each school comes and presents their school improvement plan so the board can hear it. That also creates coherence, people's understanding, quality work, and then speaking to the work and holds them accountable, and then monitor and adhere to expectations and deadlines. So this was a little bit more perfunctory about some of the next steps around the school improvement plans, but digging deeper as we go in practices that will improve the use of the plans.
On that section, again, I think I would say a number of things I think already lend themselves to the timeline analysis or approach, like the first bullet, ensure high quality professional learning on, hold on one second, yeah, on school-based planning teams ensure all school improvement plans, the second bullet, and school all improvement plans are reviewed by the Board of Education. Those things, you can have a start date and an end date. They're specific actions. So that's the kind of stuff that we were talking about. So thank you for.
In this structure, besides the quality, some of the structures are adherence to expectations and
Beth,
timelines.
I apologize. As I was reading that, the second bullet does lend itself to the who, what, where, when, how. It doesn't lend itself to the timeline. The first one, I do not think does that.
Yeah.
In other words, it sort of, and we talked about this the other night, it basically replicates the recommendation. Because the recommendation, for anybody there who doesn't have it, says, ensure chiefs play an active role in supporting, reviewing, improving, and monitoring the school plans. And then this one says, ensure high-quality professional learning on school improvement plans processed to school-based planning teams. But how are you going to do that? When are you going to do that? Again, co-opting Commissioner Elliott's language, if you could bring some specificity to that. And by the way, as the other thing that I would say, it's important that we talk about this now. We're hearing everybody's ideas. Because as I said in our meeting the other day, there are colleagues, you have colleagues that are going to be responsible. We're going to get this thing done in time. People have to hear this conversation and this thought process. So everybody, there's some people who are going to be responsible for the balance of some of these drafts. They're hearing all of us say, I think collectively the board is saying, as Commissioner Elliott said, the who, what, where, when, and how, timelines, right? So.
The other thing on this too, and I should have added it here, we do have calendars for some of this. It's already calendarized on some of the expectations that we can see attached. So there will be some of those attachments, maybe not here, although we do have one for here, for all the reviews and when plans are due. So we will attach that here.
One more thing, Beth, again, I think this bears repeating, not to you, but to others. And we did this at the meeting. Number 5 says, ensure school chiefs, right? And then, interestingly, and anybody responsible for doing this stuff, look at that recommendation. It says, ensure. It just, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Right?
I do. I do.
That's the point we were trying to make the other day. If you're basically mimicking and adding on maybe an additional word or two, you're not doing what Dr. Kino and what the citizens need us to do in this document, which is to say specifically what we're going to do to make that recommendation happen, not replicate it, not mirror it, but show what it's going to look like.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry for the redundancy. Yes, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Powell?
On the first bullet on school-based planning team, professional learning, well, that's a lot of words to say train school-based planning teams, but who exactly trains school-based planning teams? Because if it's based on, if it's driven by school chiefs, wouldn't there be variation from one chief to another, what kind of training they get? I mean, what's the umbrella for all school-based planning team training? Is it the school chiefs? Does that even belong there?
Yes, and I think one of the things that does get in terms of what Commissioner White said is that you don't see chiefs in here, which was part of the driver, to your point. And yes, there is quality around how do you develop. There is training for all school-based planning teams at level sets. But to your question, does that actually answer some of the questions? These are some of the things, to birdwalk a little bit, is that we were talking with Dr. Kino that fit in here, based on some of the findings as well, not just the recommendation, if you will. So, but so back to your question, does it belong in this section? Is that your question? It's repeated from the section above, so it doesn't have to be. I think we wanted to just highlight that that was one of the pieces.
Well,
that was it.
If it is part of the role of the school chiefs,
Yes.
then what is our assurance that when you use the phrase level set, what actions are we taking to ensure that all chiefs have the same information about what belongs in school improvement plans and that they are sharing the same instruction to school improvement teams?
So,
What's that process look like?
so a couple of things, and what Dr. Golden was saying is we have the executive school-based planning team that's very active in terms of doing the training. Now, if you go back, and this is where some of the things overlap a little bit, is that it talks here about how the school chiefs go back and help monitor and support them, and the answer before that. Does that answer your question, Commissioner? So in other words, making sure that they have the quality indicators, addressing that in their meetings with school principals and school-based planning teams, and this one was a little bit more about, we did some more focus here on the monitoring, the professional learning, the common language, ensure that they're complete, presented to the Board of Education, and monitor some deadlines. We did add some of the monitoring piece.
Well, I'm looking for specific language on school-based planning teams above, and I'm not seeing any.
We
The
only
last bullet on number 4. Okay.
Yeah. That's where we put it, because we added a little bit more about school-based planning teams because they're part of the school improvement plan, so it would seem like to leave that out did not make sense. And that is part of what the expectation is for a school. And that's especially in some of the best practice with receivership schools. So those are the things that we want to make sure we're carrying out throughout the system, because we found to make sure there are certain things that they put into practice that should be in all of our schools.
So,
Davis.
it says to ensure an active role for the school chiefs. So would you revise like the third statement to say that the chiefs will monitor? And the
That
other
would help
two statements
clarify.
to
That's good
change,
feedback.
to identify what exactly they're going to do in each
Right.
of these bullets. And so,
Active voice.
yeah.
Right, I hear you. Please, go ahead.
No, that's a disconnect I was having. It doesn't state what the active role of the chief is in each of these.
Good feedback. It was an assumption that got missed in the writing, so thank you.
I do want to go backwards, but it's up to you. I don't know, we're
Did
done with
anybody else
this
want
one.
to talk about Section 5? No, go ahead, President Davis.
If we could go back to number 3.
Okay. Okay.
Establish a process to communicate, implement, document, and monitor continuous improvement in conditions that support learning. There's a disconnect for me. I'm just wondering if you could connect what are the conditions that support learning, and then connect it to the strategies that you have listed. So how does a walkthrough create a condition? What condition is it creating that supports learning? So like, for example, I can see with finances, if you're allocating resources, so you have the proper personnel for special education services in the classroom, that strategy is supporting a learning environment by providing the personnel needed in that classroom. So the other strategies that are listed, how is engaging in those strategies, what condition is it changing or improving to support learning? So I just had a disconnect with listing the strategies, but not knowing how it's changing conditions.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I'm thinking and processing for a minute.
Yeah. So you might not have that answer now, but I just, my main question is what conditions are being targeted by these strategies that support learning? How are these activities, where are they changing? So if I have one-on-ones, what did that change? What condition did that change that now the student has an environment of learning?
So there are so many different layers to that question, right? But in terms of, I think your recommendation is to go back and take a look at that when we respond to it.
I'm thinking do it right now.
Like, we could say there are different things in walkthroughs, and what's your target? And establishing a target ahead of time about what strategy you're looking for to improve the conditions for learning. So, but we can go back and reflect on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
team, if they ask themselves what conditions.
Absolutely.
What conditions exactly support student learning?
Okay.
No, I think that completes that section. What I wanted to, and Barbara and I talked about this, given the fact that, hopefully now we have somewhat of a model, and I'm going to suggest, given the time constraints, that you make the revisions, you send them to the board. I know you have another life, but if you can get some of those revisions to us like ASAP, board members would have a certain amount of time to add. So we're not going to meet again about this particular section until we finish the whole document. But board members will have an opportunity to provide some additional input, but go with that in terms of the model, is what I'm saying to you, Barbara, and your team. So I discussed with Barbara the need to discuss with the board, given where we're at now with section, the accountability section, and using that as a model. How do you see us completing the balance of this report? Just so the board has some idea about how you're going to do this, and then we could have some conversation about that. The board could respond to what you're going to do.
Can I just ask clarity from you?
Sure.
What you're asking? You're asking Beth, or you're asking the superintendent
No,
to present a timeline? And also, Beth, this is one section for Beth. Like, I want to know when the entire thing is going to be revised for us to revise. So I think it goes back to your request to have Barbara give us a timeline.
That's exactly what Barbara is going to do.
I know, but you was asking Beth. so
Well,
I'm not-
he's asking Beth because when he asked for the timeline, because Beth is the person that is operationalizing all of the key leaders for each section, so that we wanted to make sure, and in fact, we all got together in the room, looked at everybody's calendars to ensure that what we were going to agree to do, that everyone could actually perform. So we took into people's accounts, people's personal calendars, weekend calendars, et cetera. And we did agree that it's important for us to meet the deadline to the State Education Department, which means we will write the report and the sections to the best ability of each of the key leaders in meeting the deadline. We also know it's not unusual for a state education department, and Beth is an expert in writing reports, receivership reports, when we had to do a school closure and reopening. You beat the deadline, the state gives you feedback, you're able to go back and make revisions. Sometimes they give you technical assistance. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to level set with the board to see what is it that you want to see so that you are comfortable, and then the team will do it to the very best of their ability by the deadline. So what Beth is going to do now is describe what I believe we collectively agreed that we would all commit to.
Yep.
And let me just add, no, that's okay. And perhaps I should have done a better job communicating. Sometimes you talk to people and you just go on automatic. Barbara and I had talked about this. And she told me Beth was going to give the presentation. So it wasn't like I was saying, Beth, this is all yours, you keep on going. She knew that Barbara was going to ask her to make this presentation. So I didn't mean to give the impression that this was all on Beth.
well, I didn't know, so I asked for clarity on who should be presenting that.
But I did say, at the very beginning of this session, I said, I talked to Barbara about how we were going to proceed. I did say that. But let's look forward, not in the rearview mirror. What you got?
I can speak on behalf of what we agreed to before we came in here. And then I do want to I want to clarify what some of the things we agreed to in here, just so I'm clear. And I have Dr. Golden who's taking copious notes, so we can go back just about what this should be, adding the dates by month, and shoring up the language on some of it, looking at some of the suggestions that were there, and continuing to tighten it up and make sure it's referring to the question, adding those tight timelines. So we will do that for every section moving forward. We already have a calendar starting tomorrow, knowing that we were coming back here tonight, trying to make sure we have the right format anyway, and keep digging into the content, to your point, Commissioner. So we're recommending that January 24th, that we would still submit to you the entire draft, again, based on our feedback thus far. So it would be in its draft of its first final format, if you will. So that would be on the 24th. We would ask that on the 28th, the board send us back the feedback so that we can make those revisions. And by February 1, we would present to you the final draft for you to digest. And then our understanding, as you have outlined with your board calendar, February 5th is you have a board meeting on February 5th that's already on the calendar. And we did talk to Dr. Lee about some board meeting dates that were on the calendar.
Does anybody want to give any feedback on that, concerns?
I do want to address something that the superintendent just mentioned about the state sometimes giving us technical support and those types of things. I don't want us to get caught up in the fact that we submit something that may not be up to par. Because I've been very clear, and I want to be clear again right now. I will not be signing off on anything that is subpar. You could just remove me. I will reach out to the state directly myself if I have to. I'm just not going to put my name attached to anything that I feel is subpar. And I think that we've had enough feedback at this point, especially given that we've taken this week with 2 meetings alone to flush out one small section of like 5 recommendations. That we submit something that's subpar with the assumption that the state is then going to step in and give us a little bit extension or technical assistance.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but the conversation we had with the team is you will see the best work of the ability of this team. When we talked about quality, okay, and we have Dr. Aquino here to assist us, and I have to say that both Dan and Linda have been very helpful. So I just want to make sure that you know that you're going to see the best work that the team is capable of. But do know that we've had enough experience to know sometimes they're going to say, could you move this word around or could you add clarity? Because just like you guys are reading for the first time or the second time, and every time, even if like Van read something yesterday, in rereading it today, he may actually see something that he didn't note yesterday. So it is a process, but I just want to assure everyone that this is being taken very seriously. These teams that you're looking at have canceled their calendars and have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours just getting it to this point, because you do have to digest this report. And I know that you guys spent an entire day to do this one section yesterday, right?
But the plan is to get it done to the best of everyone's ability. That's the plan. And let me just add, actually I asked a question of Carl. When this goes, just so that everybody understands how the process works, I got the letter from the state of New York. I don't know if you got one too, but it was addressed to me as board president. This isn't, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't the kind of thing where every board member will sign off. The board, and again, Carl, I'm actually asking you for your advice. My understanding is that the board will vote or take some about whether this is acceptable, whether we want to forward this on. And I, because I'm obligated to do what the board tells me to do, I will, or Barbara, will sign that letter. This is not the kind, just to let you know, I mean, you could communicate to the commissioner that if you find out, but I would ask that you not claim the loss before you determine whether there's going to be a victory or not. But assuming, for a moment, if you want to, that it's not going to be up to your standard, I think what's going to happen is the Board of Education will sign off on a document, and I will be directed, or Barbara will be directed, to sign that document or sign that letter to the commissioner. And of course, because we live in a great country, under the First Amendment, you could say whatever you wanted to the commissioner about why you didn't think it was satisfactory. But the board, and I'm going to claim the victory, because I believe our staff and all of us working diligently to contribute to this effort will give the commissioner something that I think is meaningful and very thoughtful. But Carl, am I correct on that, or is that, how do you think that's going to work?
That's consistent with my understanding, although as I heard the discussion tonight, I'm going to go back and reread the letter.
Sure.
And should I have a different understanding after that, I will be sure to communicate that to the board. But right now, as we sit here, your understanding is consistent with mine.
Yeah, so I do want to add, though, Van, I know that you want to be positive, you want to claim the victory, but this is the third draft at this point from this is a third draft already, right? We met 2 days ago to discuss the second draft, which is why I asked for the adjournment so that we could give them more time to come back to a different format. And I got to be honest, when I first saw the format, I'm like, they just added bullet points and they didn't really change too much. And then I had to like not respond and then print out the one that we were reviewing Tuesday and what was sent and go through it, so that I didn't make an assumption just on viewing the document. I'm not feeling confident, though, and I feel like we have 3 weeks, and it's taken weeks for us to get just to here, and I'm not confident where we're at here, and that's all I'm saying. And I understand that it has to go by board vote. The board majority will vote. But if it's not up to par for me, I will use my First Amendment right and speak out against it publicly, and I have a right to do that. But I've already told the commissioner that even the draft was not up to par, the first draft, and I hadn't seen the second draft at that point. But I was feeling a little bit more hopeful that while I was away for medical reasons, that in those 3 weeks, I would come back to a more solid second draft, and I didn't. And that is what raised the alarm for me at this point, because I'm nervous that we're not going to give our best effort. And this is not just to administration. We don't have a board governance section that I feel confident in. So this is not to down our staff and our administration. I'm telling you guys, it's us too. As the board governance piece, we don't have it together so far in our response that I feel confident even in this. And I feel like if we can't get it right in this, I'm concerned about the leadership that starts right here on this dais. And if we don't have our stuff together here, how can you guys have it together? Those are the concerns I have. And I am very passionate about this stuff because at the end of the day, my kid is in this district in second grade. Like, we're still at the very beginning. So every decision that is going to impact all students impacts my flesh and blood in here too. And so yes, I'm very passionate about that because I love that little girl and I want the very best for her, just like any other parent in this district. And I have some grave concerns, Van. And I don't want people to take this that I'm attacking them, because I'm not attacking you guys. But I'm telling you, like, my child is, like, my flesh and blood is directly impacted by what's going to happen next based off our response of this report. That's scary for me, so I just want to throw that out there.
Commissioner Hallmark.
Yeah, so I want to say I appreciate your passion. I share it as well. I want this to be an excellent response and action plan. I think we're all trying to do this. I want to say have faith. And I want to propose, especially in regards to the governance section, that we had some more meetings for us to flesh out this, because we clearly need, we clearly need some more meetings, next week for us to work on our part as well.
Anybody else want to add a comment? Beth, I'm sorry, Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, so again, I have concerns that we're pushing it too far back if we continue to not see something that we all can agree on. So I just want to throw out there that I would suggest us take a more aggressive role in the timeline. And I would want to see the first entire final draft on the 22nd, which is the Tuesday after the holiday. And then I would like for us to have to give feedback by the 26th. And then I would like to see a final draft by the 30th. So then if we need corrections on the final draft, just because of how the days fall, then we have enough for them to go back and correct it.
So, Barbara, Beth, Cecilia, somebody want to respond to those comments?
So again, we want to be transparent in terms of some travel, some medical, and some other issues. People put together the calendar that is the most aggressive that the team can commit to in terms of getting these sections in. You don't want them written by people that won't be implementing them. Dr. Kino and I talked about that. It's important that the people that are going to be implementing the sections actually are digging in and writing them. So what I would propose, Beth, is that you share the calendar that will accommodate the current schedules, and we try to look at weekends is the time when people have time to do the reflection, because during the day, when you schedule time to work on a plan, you're frequently interrupted with the phone calls and the other crisis go issues. So again, we can look to see if anybody wants to change plans. I know we have one person canceling a conference. I think we have some people that are looking at moving medical appointments, but.
Yeah, if you could respond, and Barbara has in part, but to Commissioner Shepherd was very specific about dates. What, in light of some of the personal restrictions, medical, vacation, can that be accomplished?
So regardless of that, even the weekend, given if we work 24, which is fine. I mean, we've worked weekends 24/7. There are commitments, and yes, we do have some personal commitments. Now, that being said, though, even if you give 3 days, so the weekend is still, people are still going to be working over the weekend. Let me just be clear about that, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And so we were hoping to still have those additional days on top of. What Cecilia was saying, so to get through all the documents, because it requires time to create a quality document, so any extra day is going to support. I'm going to put that out there. So that's how we came up with the 24th, still meeting the 24th, that was on our calendar so that we could get it in on that date. So it leaves us with the 23rd. I think Tuesday, we could use the additional cushion to make the further edits, because we're just hearing some of the edits. So for example, which I understand that you want them, for example, putting the dates here. That requires time, because there are a lot of bullet items, depending on how we structure it then moving forward. So it's not something, a section takes, if you look at it and you put the hours in it, it takes quite some time, even if you spread it out over 4 days. So if we could have through the 23rd, that would still be any time we could get to complete the report with some of the revisions that we have found today, because tomorrow we're booked through getting through every section that we can, that we already feel pretty confident that we can make these revisions. So that's where I'm at.
Commissioner Shepherd, you want to respond to that? Or?
Yeah, so you're saying that instead of the 22nd, the 23rd, you would be plausible. So here's my thing, right?
Okay.
I want to be very sympathetic to the fact that there's so much work to do, but like I can't find it in my spirit to be sympathetic, because we've been sitting on this for too long, and like we have to like expect excellence from y'all. Like we have to get this in on the 8th. I don't support asking for an extension, and I also I need my name to be attached to this so that I can feel confident in going out to the community saying we submitted something that is on point. And so, like, I guess I would say I'm sorry if it's too aggressive, but we only have 3 weeks. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, it's something we have to get done. I mean, and the adjustment of my dates, what it did was it did allow us to bring back our feedback on the 26th, which gives the weekend for you all to then go through. But it's not just rigorous for y'all, it's rigorous for us too, because we got to read through it and give feedback. So, and it's something, and I'll add the last piece. It's something that, you know, I've battled with over the last couple of days. Like, man, now I have to be in a frenzy and doing all these things and moving my life around so that I can make sure I'm giving feedback and we're having this dialogue. So, you know, I just want you to know it's not just on you, and I know it's very rigorous, and I know it seems like it might be impossible, but I do think we can do it. I mean, you guys are smart. You got a foundation already. I mean, all you're doing is just correcting some things and adding some stuff here and there. Like, I don't know. I really...
So I think the additions tonight is something that we can commit to and make sense. But like adding the dates across the whole document, we have to do that thoughtfully, because so let me just say this, if you're going to hold us to the process dates, we got to think about that. right? So we don't want to the completion date, okay. But when we're getting into process dates 2 years out, and then we're saying we're going to be held accountable to the process inside of this, we want to be thoughtful about it. I put that.
That's a good point, and I know we haven't talked about that. I know we'll get into that in the governance section, but when you're talking about putting something 2 years out or whatever the case may be, I actually don't support that. I think that we should be putting in there that we need to let the state know we have to wait until we get a permanent superintendent, and then we're going to give a directive to the permanent superintendent for stuff like that. So, and I know I'm just an individual commissioner on that point, but I mean, that's something that I don't think you all should be doing.
So I'm sympathetic to the concern that Barbara's expressed on occasion, and other rational people say, well, what is it that the board wants? I want to be clear that I support discussion, to some extent, reference to timeframes. I think I heard Commissioner Hallmark sort of generally endorse that idea. I know Commissioner LeBron did. I don't know, I haven't heard from the folks. And again, Commissioner Shepard, this is not to, but I'm just trying to get them some direction as to what the board wants in this regard.
Absolutely.
Because you make some strong points, but we got to make sure that we can speak with one voice to them on this particular issue. Do you guys have any comments or preferences on whether we should be adding time frames to the bullets, start dates, finish dates?
My feedback on timelines is the Army has a 1/3, 2/3 rule. You don't take any more than 1/3 of the time allowed to do the planning. Then you have to turn it over to the rest of the folks to execute. So if you expect to have all teams trained, for instance, let's use the example of all of your school-based planning teams trained by the end of next year, you can't use up one whole year planning to do the training. You can't use any more than 9 months in your planning, and that will leave you 15 months to execute. That's, as a rule of thumb, planning should not take more than 1/3 of the time allowed. So if you already know what your project complete date is, whatever it is, you don't get to have more than 1/3 of that for yourself. That's what I would guide. That's the guidance I would offer.
So would you support, though, putting timelines on here?
If the word is plan,
Yeah.
yeah, I could see putting in an end date for all planning. Okay. Your hard stop for your planning so that you can turn it over to those who have to execute it.
So that's a different way of thinking about it, sort of a compromise with respect to what Commissioner Shepard was saying. Not putting down when the project is going to start and when it's going to complete, but planning a planning time frame, because we're about to transition, the logic goes, we're about to transition into a interim superintendent, and then we're going to have a permanent superintendent. So to plan out a start date and stop date for people that we don't even, a person who we don't even know what his or her plans are, how they could deviate, or how his or her resources could deviate from that plan. That's essentially what you're saying.
But can I just add, though, that this was even my feedback at the original press conference when this report first dropped. I don't care who the face of the superintendent is. As a board, we need to have a direction of where this board is going. And our response to this, I'm viewing this as the direction that the board's going to go, regardless of who the superintendent is. We hire the superintendent, and we work with the superintendent to give them the plan and the vision and the directives. If they've come with additional idea resources, we still have monthly, quarterly progress reports that have to be submitted to the state anyway on this original draft. So I just don't see the correlation of removing a timeline. There has to be a start and end date. Otherwise, we're just saying that we're going to do something, and we don't know when we're going to start it, and we don't know when we're going to end it, but we're going to do it. That doesn't sit well with me, and I don't think that that's a good way to set our outcomes and for our goals. I want to throw that out there. Now, I do want to go back to Commissioner Shepard's timeline. I just had a little sidebar conversation with her because I do want to support the timeline that Beth presented. However, I want us as a board to own the one that Commissioner Shepherd is proposing for us. Back to what Commissioner Hallmark just mentioned, that we have to get our stuff together for board governance. And so I would like us to take Commissioner Shepherd's proposed timeline for this board to flush out and finalize governance. And those dates kind of coincide a day or two around Beth's proposal. That gives us enough time to review your stuff and for us to get our stuff together and bring it all together by the deadline of the February 5th board meeting on all pieces, the board governance, administration, and I just want to throw that out there, that I want to tie all those back together.
Okay, but I want to handle things one thing at a time.
Yeah, that's not a lot of
And the issue that I'm sensitive to, because I hear Barb and other superintendents passing, I want to hear what the board wants on this issue of timelines for action steps. That's the first thing that I want to get clarity on. What is the board's pleasure on putting timelines for action steps? I hear what you said. I think you still support that. I heard what you said, Commissioner Powell, but I still think that we should put timelines for our action steps, understanding that we'll have a superintendent 6 months, and he or she may say, you know what, this needs to be tweaked, and I'm sure the commissioner will say, yeah, we need to adjust that. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't see the danger in setting the task before us, giving ourselves a certain amount of time, and then understanding that in good human relationships, there's always flexibility. We will be flexible with our superintendent if we are the people that I think we are, and I hope the commissioner will be flexible when that superintendent says, hey, listen, we've got to adjust this. This plan is being adjusted. I don't even know that she will even be, well, Dr. Kino will be here, and assuming that he'll be here in 6, 7 months, and they'll have a conversation. So I'm personally, I'm okay with having timelines for action steps.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
and I agree that timelines sharpen our focus, so I would support timelines.
Okay.
I also support it.
Okay, so we're good there. Now, Commissioner Shepherd raises the additional point of timelines. This is what we were talking with you about, Beth. Timeline for this whole effort. If possible, can you two continue that conversation? Because I want to see where we're at with that. Because you were talking about 22nd versus 23rd.
Yeah, so let me just, and I'll read this and you can correct me, and you can
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, because I have two timelines here. Beth proposed for administration to redraft everything and have it to the board by the 24th. The board will then have to the 28th to review it, give feedback, and so forth. And then the final draft would be February 1st, because we have a board meeting on February 5th, and that's when we would vote as a board, as a body, whether it's up to par and so forth. Now, Commissioner Shepherd proposed, she wanted to see earlier timeline, but I had a sidebar conversation with her because I feel like we still need to get our board governance piece in check. There is a lot of feedback. Commissioner Hallmark gave some feedback in a different format. Commissioner Elliott, who's not here right now, gave feedback. Natalie and myself also gave feedback. And you gave feedback, Van. So we have a few people's feedback just kind of floating out there as independent documents. We still need to have a conversation around all of it, merge it, how we're going to merge it. So I want to support that we take Commissioner Shepherd's timeline of January 22nd for us to get one collective document, not all agreed upon, but we do need to get everybody's feedback in one format. And that we then give feedback by the 27th. Is that the 27th?
Wait, so you're proposing?
Oh, the 26th.
What's due on the 22nd?
So the 22nd, this is for the board only.
Right,
Let me
right,
just
right.
throw this out here. This is the board's timeline. I personally would like to support what Beth proposed for the administration. And I think with Commissioner Shepherd timeline, it would allow us time to go through board governance and give us time to process board governance and the administration separately. I just think if we took everybody's plus hours, I think that would be a little bit too much. So the 22nd of January for us to have
A meeting?
a meeting. We could do it a meeting style. I support that too. So feedback 1, the 22nd, the 26th, and the 30th for the final draft. So that when we come back together on February 5th, we're just voting on our portion that's already been added to the administration's portions. And that gives us time, the 24th, the 28th, and February 1st, to have that feedback with administration, and it kind of co-aligns at the same time frame. Because I agree with Commissioner Shepherd. We're going to have to actually read and digest this and have feedback, but we have our own section to do.
And can I propose, I like that generally, I would like to propose that the board gets all of our feedback by the end of this weekend, so that we have a few days to read it in preparation for the 22nd, if we're going to have a
So if you
meeting.
can send an email with everyone's feedback attachments.
What I will do is put the current format that we've been using in a Google Doc, and I ask that amendments be made to this form.
Okay.
And within the same format. Right now, there's a lot of comments, there's even questions built in. If you can just add the language that you would like to see submitted to the commissioner in this format, that'll be very helpful.
Okay, so go ahead.
But I do have some questions based on the feedback that I received, so that I can reflect them in the document that I post tomorrow, or unless you just want me to post it as
But
is.
if you believe the better approach is to have us utilize Google Docs or whatever to integrate our
Are
comments.
you guys going to commit?
Yes.
I mean, I think that makes sense.
I
because-
can say that the whole reason I made a new format was I wrestled to the death with this document. I couldn't get all my bullets and everything. I gave up, and I said, I'm just doing it.
It was hard. You had to start in someone else's
And then you
sentence.
couldn't open the
then-
windows, and
yeah,
I
that
couldn't
was-
read what all the stuff I was writing. So
Okay.
Google Doc would be great.
It would still be in Excel. I don't know if that's clear.
No,
You
that's
want a
Google
Word
has its own.
format? No, it doesn't. You just upload it. Well, we'll discuss that offline.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
no, let me say, so some of us are not that good, so you need to explain it now. Can you do it through Google Docs?
There's
I'll
a,
post it to a
there's like
Google
a
Drive. What-
spreadsheet in Google. Google has a spreadsheet, just like this.
We'll talk.
It's not Excel, though.
Okay. It's-
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you'll give us all some instruction on how to do it, because I do think that would be the better way. I see 4 or 5 separate memos from people
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
are
that's
really
what I'm
integrated. I
saying.
think Natalie seemed to have gotten in there. in
Me and
purple,
Natalie,
yeah.
she's purple, I'm red.
But I think that would be
Yeah,
easier.
I don't have a
Me and Red
problem
and
with these
purple.
columns, it's just that I couldn't get my stuff in it, you know, it was just too
So,
much stuff.
you've heard a proposal to meet on, what was the date again?
The 22nd?
22nd, but get our stuff in by the end of this weekend.
Yep.
Right, so, and
Is the-
send it out to each other, so we can read and be
Commissioner
prepared.
Davis?
Is the 23rd possible? The 22nd, we have real team meeting.
The 23rd, just so everyone knows,
On
designation
Tuesday.
starts on the 23rd this year.
Oh.
So it's a no for me on the 23rd, but we should do the 22nd.
No, it's on the 22nd, is the real team. That's a Tuesday.
What time is that?
That's from 6 to 8.
4:30? Can people make 4:30?
I can make 4:30, and then if not, I could do 7. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want to
How about the 22nd at 4:30?
I don't know about that, I have a big old meeting.
Well, I mean, one of the things we could do, we really don't want to operate without every board member, but on occasion that's going to happen, like Cynthia could not be here today, but she submitted her stuff. You know, it might be that if we can get most of us here, 5, 6 of us here, that may be the way to go, given the time constraints. I mean, we would love to have you here, Liz, or
And
Reverend Davis,
Commissioner,
but if you
I'll just send my
can't,
comments.
yeah, you can always just send in your
I
comments.
was going to say, Commissioner Hallmark said if we can all get our comments in by the weekend so that we could review what we're going to come in and discuss. And so if we can all get our comments in, when we come together on the 22nd, add additional, and I think we should bring our tablets or our laptops so that we can go right into Google Docs and make our edits right then and there, so that whoever's not here can then go back and review. It's almost like a live doc, so.
So could we do a 5 o'clock meeting on the 22nd?
I can.
I'm not
So
sure.
I just want to say
More likely to make
that
it.
I will be available whenever we need to meet. However, I still am in disagreement with the scheduled timeline, but I will be available.
We still have to do our part.
Couldn't hear you over
We don't have a calendar for our part.
sneeze. That's not your fault.
Commissioner Shepherd, could you repeat
Can
that?
you
'Cause,
repeat yourself?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to make it very clear that I still think that our timeline needs to be more aggressive. However, since the majority of the board would like to move in a different direction, I will be available whatever dates and times that everybody's available.
Appreciate that. Okay, so now y'all will correct me if I'm wrong. I would think the better approach here is to not try to do this tonight then.
I agree.
Right?
No, I agree. No,
Right. Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
What I'm
All right.
saying is
All
we
right.
need to take time to read
Right.
everybody else's, which
Yeah.
I just got your stuff,
Yep.
Van, today. I
Yep.
did see yours, Liz, and I saw Commissioner Shepard's earlier.
There's even an update to that.
Right,
Yes.
so, yes, but also, whoever has not submitted yet to this document, or whatever format you want to do it until Shanae gets it up and going, if we could all take the time this weekend to review that, that would be beneficial.
And Beth, just to sort of wrap things up, and by extension, obviously, I mean, Barbara, are you good?
Great.
Cecilia, there was a couple of occasions that I saw you, I mean, it's very difficult, the job that Beth had, but sometimes it's difficult to sit there and not say stuff when you want to say stuff. I thought I saw on a couple of occasions you looked like you wanted to say something, so I wanted to make sure, since you're a major contributor here, if there's anything that you wanted to add, concerns, observations, suggestions, I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to do that.
So Dr. Golden, I can tell you at one point, when I said that you all already have a foundation to move forward from, that you did give a reaction, so maybe that could focus in on what you were thinking at that point.
I know, I peeped that too. I just want to say, I was like,
I don't play poker. Okay, so I don't really have much that I want to say. However, I think there were some things that were said today, and I don't remember who said it, and that was about this being the plan moving forward. This will be the district's improvement plan moving forward. And it's obvious that some things that may have been in place are not or have not been working. The school-based planning team needs to be, the teams have to be almost re-engineered and refocused on what their purpose is, because we're not uniformly addressing what we were designed to do, and that is teaching and learning, programmatic changes, making sure classrooms are configured the way that they're supposed to. So I really appreciate the question that talked about if the chiefs individually are doing the professional development, what is our confidence that each team is getting that common professional development and monitoring in the same way. And that's when I did come up. You may have had your head down, Commissioner, when I said to Beth, don't forget the executive school-based planning team. And we recently decided to send a team to New York City, me included, next week for the training, because I would be taking a lead in this, like I used to a little while ago. However, I'm not going to go to New York City, but the teams, 2 schools will be represented, School 16 and School 33. And so they'll come back, I will get the information, I'll find a way to, engage with the AFT CSI, those are the people who are doing it, to make sure that that's one structure that we have in place. And I do appreciate the comments about the receivership schools, in that it says to us that there is profound change that needs to take place. So that's what I was just kind of thinking about.
thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Golden.
You're welcome.
Okay, just to wrap things up.
Could I ask one more
Yes,
question?
absolutely.
Do we have a strategic plan? We don't have one to review. Okay.
So we have the comprehensive plan, and we also have the strategic plan, the 3-year strategic plan that I think you all have copies of. What we did was we stopped on a number of plans when the commissioner advised that Dr. Aquino would be here, so that we didn't end up with multiple plans. And we've talked to Dr. Aquino about integrating the comprehensive district plan with this plan, with the strategic plan. So if you look at the strategic plan, the 3-year strategic plan, this actually deepens it. It actually gives examples of how those things are going to be implemented. So for example, it talks about curriculum, tier 1, 2, and 3. This actually puts more meat on it, so he had suggested that we integrate them. But Beth, there were copies of those plans in a recent board packet. Do you remember which one that was? Was it the last meeting that you included all of them?
Oh, it was in the last one as an attachment to this document.
That's
So
what I thought.
Friday, but I
So-
can resend it on the Friday memo.
All right,
So this is the strategic plan that Dr. Aquino mentioned wasn't implementable, and it need to be fuller details? Do we have a?
No, that was
more
the
focused-
comprehensive district education plan. The 3-year strategic plan actually built upon that. He was talking about the comprehensive district education plan.
So the path forward is not implementable. That's not the strategic plan that we're using right now.
The path forward was about the Board of Education resolutions to look at the managed choice policy versus other school enrollment and assignment policies, and was to respond to the board subcommittee, a special committee on neighborhood enrollment strategies. That work was taken to a certain place, a certain point, at which point, again, we stopped moving it forward with the understanding that as the budget became clearer, as new schools went into receivership, and as FMP3 came into play with swing space, that we have the plan moving forward for moving schools. So we can revisit that as well. We will make for our new board member, we will make a complete packet of all of those components and sit and explain them, because I would agree it is a continuous improvement process. What we're trying to do is not see Dr. Aquino's report as separate from the work we've been doing, but as a complement to it.
So I would just like the guidelines that's guiding the district as I consider the governance piece that we're looking at. So if there is a strategic plan, I'd like a copy.
Don't get me started on that, because I said we don't have a plan and a direction, and I've been saying this as a board and a district. I just want to throw that out there, but go ahead, man.
Okay. All right. I do want to close the meeting as I began. I want to thank Barbara, Beth, Cecilia, Dr. Aquino, of course, and Dan and Linda for stepping in earlier than you were supposed to. And then I also want to thank members of the Board of Education. You know, you can write all kinds of recommendations you want in voluminous reports, but the rubber hits the road when you have to have difficult discussions where people naturally will have different opinions. And, you know, some people would say, oh, you don't have to point that out, but I think as frequently as people point out how quote-unquote dysfunctional we are, I think we did a good job today, trying to work through some very difficult conversations. I think we've handled it differently than we've handled it in the past, and the reason why I point that out is you have to recognize your growth in order to get anywhere. So I don't necessarily know what tomorrow will bring, but I know today, I will say, I think we did a better job at communicating, and the primary beneficiary for that will be our students and our families. So can I get a motion? Yes, ma'am.
A request for an executive session.
Based on what's the reason? Okay, all right. I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss a personnel matter. It's been made by Commissioner Shepherd, seconded by Commissioner LeBron. All those in favor say aye. Aye. For those of you who don't know, we will go into executive session downstairs, and then we will go back, reconvene into open session. We will adjourn from downstairs. So I'm saying good night to you now. Good night.